Welcome to BigTent USA. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I'm delighted to host today's discussion with Protect Our Winters' Erin Sprague and Abby Smith. At BigTent USA, we put democracy above partisanship. We are a national women-led voter coalition dedicated to protecting democracy and our children and grandchildren's future through education and civic engagement. I'm so honored to introduce our guest. Abby Smith is a POW athlete and Alliance member and climb team captain, professional climber, producer, and storyteller born and raised in Colorado. For the last 25 years, she has dedicated her life to climbing, exploring uncharted territories, and sharing stories that offer new perspectives through writing, film, virtual reality, and live experiences. Her unrelenting drive for exploratory and big mountain bouldering, we're going to need a picture of that, Abby, has led her all over the world. She's established first ascents on 5 continents from the extreme altitudes of the Himalayas. Perfect. Oh my gosh, look at her. Okay, that's a big boulder. She's established first ascents on 5 continents from the extreme altitudes of the Himalayas and Andes to remote islands in Thailand. She's an Explorers Club national member and sponsored by La Sportiva and Marmot. Erin Sprague is the CEO of Protect Our Winters, where she helps outdoor enthusiasts protect the places and experiences they love from climate change. Previously, Erin built world-class brands in the outdoor industry as the Chief Brand Officer at Aspen Skiing Company, VP of Marketing at Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Sport, and Global Head of Women's Brand and Product at Specialized Bicycles. Most recently, Erin has worked with leaders from Google and Nest to help build climate tech startups, tackling food waste and heat pump adoption. Erin started her career in finance and public affairs at the Blackstone Group and graduated from the Stanford Graduate School of Business and Harvard College. So welcome to BigTent, Abby and Erin. I'll let you take it from here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting us to be here today. And thank you for that wonderful introduction, Kitty. We're very excited to share what we are doing at POW and how we are guiding members of the outdoor community towards systemic action. But first, I'll share a little bit more about my story and these big boulders that you're referring to. I grew up in Colorado, the gateway of the Rocky Mountains, where I fell in love with climbing. And I've done all disciplines of climbing, but my favorite is kind of what you're seeing over here, is called big mountain bouldering, where essentially I'm looking for stunning boulders in the biggest mountains, and for safety, I use basically a nest of foam crash pads. It's a little crazy, I know, but I have traveled to the world's highest ranges and to remote islands to establish these first ascents, and it's always an adventure to get there. I take great time and care to research and connect with the local communities who intimately understand how to navigate through these extreme and pristine environments. They teach about their culture, history of the land, and how to read these landscapes for safe passage. So I traveled some absurd distances by foot in hopes that the objective is possible, the conditions are safe, and the weather permits. I live in a base camp style where I'm like right next to the objective, untethered, disconnected from technology, and my whole world is complete. And these experiences alter my actions and my future. This is where I find my grounding and empowerment, and there are valuable life lessons to learn in every landscape. But with this intimate relationship with the environment, I've become acutely aware of the effects of climate change. The seasons are now more unpredictable, the trusted patterns are now disrupted, there are fierce and erratic storms, and the mountains are melting, creating unstable and dangerous conditions all over the world. And so I really wanted to make meaningful climate action, but the issue just felt so massive, I didn't really know how to get started. And so I joined POW in 2019, and it's one of the best decisions I've ever made. They have provided education, a community, and a pathway to tackle systemic climate solutions. And we believe that every outdoor enthusiast and brand has immense potential for impact. We all have stories of climate change that can create common ground and bravery to take on this immense challenge. And at PAL, we are here to unlock that potential. And now I will turn it over to our first female CEO, Erin Sprague, and she will share more about PAL and our strategies for driving meaningful action.
Thanks so much, Abby. Well, first, I'm way less cool than Abby, so I'm glad you got to hear from one of our athletes to start. I am so thrilled to be in this group of amazing women, maybe a few men in there too, but really a collective group of people who are helping to solve some of our hardest challenges in the world. And I'll skip over me. I got a great intro from Kitty before, and I really want to jump into some of our work and tell you about us. This is not me on this snowboarding slope. This is our founder, Jeremy Jones. Jeremy is a professional snowboarder. He's someone who inspires me a lot. He started PAL in 2007. And when you think back to that time, you know, some of the first conversations that we were having as an organization were about this issue and the science and the fact that it exists. And this is a shot of Jeremy snowboarding in Nepal. It's a 65-degree slope. If this were me, like my thoughts would be about, you know, like my impending death, like probably about to tumble like fully down this line, even as a very passionate skier. And his thought was like, this snow is changing. This is not the same as it used to be. And it was part of the impetus for him starting an organization that originally was led largely by snow athletes who were just out in the field every day and were like, wait a minute, this whole story isn't adding up. And if you look at what has happened, and you know, you can go back to that 2007 year, but you can look at their trajectory of global temperatures and see something that's pretty scary in the science. So you might have read in the New York Times or several other publications that reported this. 2023 was the hottest year we've ever had, and 2024 is shaping up to be even hotter. And if you tracked emissions on this chart, they would really closely follow this chart. And when you look at the science, something that's also scary about this is this slope. So the slope is increasing. So we're starting to see all of these factors and fossil fuel usage come together in a way that, while our athletes have been seeing it for a long time and scientists have been calling the alarm for a long time, there are actually some interdependencies and factors that we don't totally understand when the slope gets steeper. When we think about how this is affecting people, I find this stat really interesting. You know, climate change used to be something that was a little bit esoteric, a little bit like, you know, we all know this is a problem. There's so many issues that we're facing. But now there is $1 billion climate-related disaster in the US every 3 weeks. In the 1980s, the statistic was every 4 months. So in the 80s, warming was happening, but not at the same rate and not in the same way. And if you look at the world and what's happening around the world right now, we've had a record tornado season. One of the biggest cities in North America, Mexico City, is on the precipice of running out of water. There is a record heat wave in India. Temperatures are above 125 degrees Fahrenheit for sustained periods of time. I didn't see if anyone here is from Arizona, but if any of you were in Phoenix or Arizona last summer, you know some of the heat waves and the sustained heat waves that people in that state were experiencing. And so these impacts are really tangible, and they're now starting to affect people at a community level, people's homes, their schools, their families, their water. This is becoming a little bit more of an everyday thing, in part because of the slope of that line and how it's starting to impact global temperature patterns. I also find this stat really interesting. I love meeting people My daughters, 4 and 6, are two examples of this. They're very concerned about the steps that they take as citizens to be more sustainable, which is super important and something that we reinforce. But if you actually look at the way to solve this problem, 100 companies cause 70% of industrial emissions. And that, like, those companies are fossil fuel companies. And so this issue is actually fairly concentrated. And so the way that we solve it, well, there are so many ways as individuals that we can live what we at POW call an examined life. There's actually like a big chunk of this that we could address that would help solve a lot of this. And when I think about climate change, something that actually gives me a ton of hope is that we know how to solve this. Like, think about all the social ills in the world that we don't know how to solve, that science hasn't figured out yet. But climate change is different. Like, climate change, like, we just have to stop burning stuff. Like, the solution is right there. And actually, the trajectory is heading that way. So last year, globally, 30% of global energy sources were from renewables. And this is like a cheaper, faster, better source of energy. So over time, this is going to work and we're going to solve this. But the challenge is, in order to solve it, we actually have to change big systems, like how we get energy, how we as a society go from place to place, you know, how we consume food, how food is created. All of these different systems require this transition that took several hundred years to get to this point. And the challenge is we don't have several hundred years to get out of it before we do that, like, irreparable long-term damage. So what we're looking at is, how do we change systems, knowing that this is caused by sort of a narrow slice of influences? How do we do that as fast as possible? Because the issue now is really time. The technologies exist. There's a lot of culture and political will that, you know, we as an organization do a lot of work to continue to build, because that road is still long. But how do we get to this faster? And that's where we come in. So I'm so excited for all of you to just take some time out of your day and, one, talk about climate, which I do all day, every day. It makes me like a debatably popular person to invite to cocktail parties, but I will talk about this nonstop. We get you for an hour today, and we get to talk about the way that we uniquely want to solve this problem. So at POW, we're the outdoor movement for climate action. And what we do is we train. We do over 300 education sessions a year. We advocate, we drive policy solutions. We believe that policy is actually the lever to drive that big systems change. And we do a lot of storytelling. We inspire on systems level thinking and the difference between what you as an individual do yourself versus what you can do as a collective, as someone who votes and elects the right candidates, engages in elections, and helps drive that will for some of these bigger policies that are going to change some of these systems. And we do it through a specific target audience. So if you look at the number of people who live in the US and who self-identify as loving the outdoors, it's 168 million people, or 55% of the US. I was giving this presentation to a group in Colorado the other day, and they were like, it's actually 92% in Colorado. So can you please update that? Like, we're really proud that our percentage is higher than the national average. But nationally, about 55% of the population loves the outdoors. And when you survey them, actually like want to help protect it. And so we call this group of people the outdoor state. This would be way bigger than any single state in our union if it had its own, you know, senators and House representatives. And we think about it almost like this is an interest group that you could have a membership to. So a group that we look at that has done this well in a totally different area, love them or hate them, the NRA has built an interest group around what they're trying to protect and their passion. They have millions of members and they have about 40% of the US. So they're smaller than people who love the outdoors, but they're more powerful because they're less fragmented and they've brought people together. And that's a lot of what we try to do at POW. We want to build that collective to bring like-minded people who love the outdoors to drive change. And we do it largely through what I call the Trojan horse of climate. And that is leveraging the most inspirational humans we have in the world, our professional athletes like Abby and many others here. You may know Tommy Caldwell, he's another famous climber. Chloe Kim, she's a snowboarder. Nina Aragon, she's a scientist. We also have scientists who are athletes who join our team. Our athletes are climbers, snowboarders, skiers, runners, and cyclists, and they all dedicate their platforms, their influence. In the case of Jessie Diggins, she offered to like donate her gold medal from the Olympics in Nordic skiing to the cause. And what they do is they use their voices to drive some of this change. You know, people tend to pay attention to athletes. When we go to DC, the number of doors that will open for an Olympic medalist, someone who's represented his or her country on the biggest stages, is actually pretty significant. So we train these athletes to be experts in climate, and we create opportunities to go and lobby, to get out the vote, to drive civic engagement and policy change, and they lead our broader community in doing this. We also partner with brands. So in addition to the athletes, outdoor brands have a really big, important voice. So whether it's Burton or Yeti or Patagonia or Strava, the North Face, Salomon, we partner with all the best brands in the outdoor space who literally have businesses that depend on us preserving and protecting the environment for future use. And we leverage their voices for corporate advocacy. So we just finished a big CEO summit where we brought a bunch of CEOs and told them, you need to be advocating for climate policy. Here's how. You need to be helping your employees get out and vote in this election. Like it or not, like politics is a part of this trajectory, whether it's this issue or the many others that BigTent also works on. Like this is something that's unavoidable. And so we help corporations which have different levels of interest, acumen, excitement about this. You know, you take a brand like Patagonia and they're like, whoo, we're all in, like, show us where to lobby, we'll show up. And then we have others that are a little bit more reluctant. And those are important partners with big, powerful voices to bring along on this journey for change. And we do a lot. So this year we spoke at the UN. This is B. Kim at the UN International Day for Sport. She's 17 years old. I was laughing because this lovely woman introduced herself and I was like, oh, Kathy, you know, are you an athlete? And she goes, no, I'm B. Kim's mom. Like, she's 17. These athletes are so young. So you have these just incredibly poised, young, like about to be Olympians and best athletes in the sport who are choosing to spend their time away from their high school friends to come and advocate for climate change. And like, if there's anything that can give you hope in this, it's the number of young students who we hear from every day who are like, how do I get involved with POW? What can I do to help? How do we get out the vote? Like, it just gives us so much hope that there's a solid trajectory in future generations on this. We're also going to be at the Paris Summer Games. We have athletes competing in climbing, biking, and running. And so we'll be there. Several of them are nominated for sustainability awards with the IOC. So like another way on a big stage that athletes can use their platforms for change. We testified to the Senate Budget Committee hearing earlier this year. That was a really tough crowd with several senators who were directly funded by fossil fuel interests. And we had to stand up to them and hold our ground and have a dialogue about the importance of the energy transition. We also show up at ski, bike, and run events. So part of our model is we really want to meet people where they're engaging in their hobbies and passions. If we meet you as a runner or a cyclist, we think you're going to be more likely to get involved. We don't think climate has to be this like boring, like chart and graph filled drudgery fest. Like, We think it can be super fun, and we can do it at a trailhead or on the crag or in a place where you're out riding your bikes. And there are ways to leverage that passion into action. And then we also get the question like, what can I do? And this is something that we love to hear, because that means someone is engaged, they recognize the challenge, and they want to take action. And so we create a lot of resources for that. This is a free resource that's on our webpage. Maybe someone can drop it in the chat, Abby or Susanna. And this basically gives a step-by-step, like, here's how you take action on climate. And one of the biggest ways that we advise people to take action is by getting politically engaged and voting. So when we look at what we're doing this year, we have 3 main areas. So the first thing we do is stoke the vote. I'm from the East Coast, so I didn't know that like the verb stoke is actually like a really cool thing among people who love the outdoors, but it is. And so we get out there and we get people excited to vote and to show up and to engage politically. We're actually doing a call to action this year for people to triple their vote. So not only you vote, but get 2 friends, because we're really worried about apathy. We're worried that people aren't showing up because they're not excited about the candidates. And we think maybe we can help juice the denominator a little bit. And we're specifically targeting our outdoor state constituents. So we're working really hard in like the Western US, where people tend to be out in recreation environments. We also do ongoing policy advocacy and legislative initiatives. So following the Inflation Reduction Act, this was the most landmark piece of climate legislation that's ever passed. If you look at the Biden administration's climate track record, it's incredible. They've done an incredible job at passing legislation to help solve this problem, getting money into communities that need it. They've done a less good job at the narrative and the storytelling on how much great work they've done. But there's also a lot of follow-up policy that's needed to help implement this work. So we crafted legislation and introduced it a couple weeks ago with Senator Welch from Vermont and House Representative from New Hampshire, Annie Kuster. Senator Hickenlooper from Colorado also signed on to the legislation. And it's legislation to modernize our grid. So if you think about a power line and like our grid, it would fall into like a 2x2 quadrant of most important and least sexy. Like the thing that like probably nobody wants to hear about and engage with, but it's so important. So we're like challenge accepted at POW. We love like this type of thing where we can bring awareness to a part of the energy transition that maybe has gotten a little bit less, but will be a barrier if we don't fix this. So it basically develops community incentives to help host more grid transmission infrastructure. And then we also protect public lands from fossil fuel and mineral development. So we've protected lands in Colorado, Nevada, and Alaska this year. And we often do campaigns to get people involved and engaging through signatures and helping us advocate and spread the word. These wins are like few and far between. There was just a major protection that passed, thanks in part to the work of POW alongside many coalition partners, to protect an area of land called the Thompson Divide in Colorado, which is this like beautiful 225,000 acres of pristine wilderness in Colorado that now will not only be protected for future recreation, but there can't be fossil fuel development on it. So it has a future emissions reduction impact as well. And then we do a lot of films and storytelling. So athletes today, this like blows my mind. Not only do you have to like win gold in the Olympics or win the World Cup, you also have to be a film producer, a social media manager, someone who can tell your story with poise and grace on everything from Zoom to Instagram to like, I don't know, like Netflix. And so athletes are just incredible at surfacing and telling stories. So we develop grants. We do 5 to 15 grants a year that give athletes the ability and the funds to tell the stories of what they're seeing out in the world. So we've told stories on glaciers melting, on bipartisan conversations, on getting more people of color into the outdoors. They have a big range, and they're really meant to meet people who are excited about getting outside, and it kind of brings them into our world of advocacy. So let's talk about this election. You're all like, finally, this is what we really care about. And I love this about this group. So we often position elections, pro-climate candidates, getting involved politically as the #1 thing that any person can do to support future climate solutions. Something I think is really interesting, you all have probably covered this, but there are 60+ elections this year around the globe. It is a major year for climate amidst a whole bunch of other issues. And something that not a lot of people are talking about is the role that the next US president is going to play in appointing Supreme Court justices. This is a talking point when we talk to CEOs that really resonates with them. We also highlight, some of the conversations that have gone on with oil and gas executives and how that's just really not setting the right course for future renewable energy and climate. So this is a majorly important election for this and many other issues. And we're tackling it in a unique way. So we run a national Stoke the Vote campaign, and this is designed specifically to fight apathy, to get people to the polls. So we do all sorts of we take that alliance of famous athletes and just get them into the public narrative as much as possible. Social media posts, op-eds, interviews, anything it takes to get them out there spreading this message to inspire other people. We also host film festivals. We do challenges on a fitness social platform called Strava, which usually has a bunch of different users. And we also activate at run, bike, and ski events. So we'll be at ultra marathons in Montana, if that's your jam. See you at Run the Rut in a couple months. We'll be at gravel bike events, really meeting people where they are in their world of outdoor participation. And then we partner. So we partner with the Environmental Voter Project. We're partnering with conservation groups in the states that we're activating in, specifically in Montana and Nevada. And we're putting ads into these markets in ways that are unique and different. There's a senator in Montana named Senator Tester. He's one of the most wonderful pro-climate advocates. He's a former rancher and comes from this deep agricultural background. And he has this kind of flipped up hair in the front. So we're thinking of doing ads with skiers ski jumping off the front of his hair. So you can see that we have a different point of view and approach. We want to get people to sit up, pay attention, and get out there and cast a vote for these candidates. We also have an action fund. So many of you probably know as a 501c4, our POW group is a 501c3, so it can't endorse candidates. POW AF, our POW Action Fund, is designed to endorse candidates. It's a 501c4, and it will specifically identify candidates in battleground states in the Mountain West that we think are going to be won or lost by 5,000 to 10,000 votes. So we go in, do all of those strategies with outdoor enthusiast activation. And we've been given feedback in the past that this work has helped swing some of those elections. So when we look at our target races for this year, you can see a heavy concentration in the Mountain West. We focus again on these states where there are real battlegrounds, where we have pro-climate candidates with a strong track record in this area, and where we know that we can go in and activate our athletes and activate our community. We would love to be in Michigan and Pennsylvania and a few others. That's probably down the road for us. We want to be all in on the places where we think we can have the biggest influence. And the other one I'll just point out is Utah. Caroline Gleich is running for the Senate race in Utah for Mitt Romney's seat. She's a ski mountaineer who started her climate advocacy journey as a POW athlete and really came up through the ranks to this just incredible level where she's running for federal office and has really changed the conversation in Utah, which trends fairly conservative. She's a very experienced and noted, not only mountaineer, she's summited Everest and like many other significant accomplishments, but she has a really long track record as an environmentalist and advocate. So when we think about 2024, this is a phrase from the ski world. It's called a no-fall zone. Like if you're on the cliff, the consequences would be dire if you fell off of it. So we think about that for 2024 in these elections, and that's a lot of the message that we're putting out in the world. And so our call to action when we have these conversations with awesome like-minded groups like all of you is first to donate. So nonprofits are doing a lot of really important work on the ground, and to do it early. A lot of people don't donate early in an election year. All the money comes in like September, October, and that's great. We have a plan for that, but we can do more if it comes in earlier. We also give a call to action to engage. So everyone here has a level of influence in your communities, in your companies, in the media, in your social circles. Use that influence to engage other people and help them overcome the barriers of apathy and misinformation that are just rampant in this election cycle. And then join us if you're one of those 55% of people who love the outdoors. I don't know, I'm looking at pictures. This looks like it could be an outdoorsy bunch here. So maybe that stat is higher. But we welcome everyone to join Team POW. It's actually free to join. Donations are suggested. And we just love to grow the movement. And that's one of the biggest ways that we're going to grow to numbers that have more political influence for this issue. And then finally, we had some supporters last week actually at our CEO Summit who asked, like, what's the biggest issue you're facing right now? And beyond the sort of like no fall zone, death of democracy, like all those ones, we said urgency. We said, like, we really want to get people fired up and engaged. And I don't know, the summer's just been a little bit sleepy. So they said, well, we'll help you. We're going to give you a 400K match. And if you can get people to match that, you'll have almost $1 million in the door in the next month, in a time when it's actually a little bit difficult to raise the money. And this can go to both the 501c3 nonprofit with a tax exemption and also to the C4. So it can help elect those really mission critical, really winnable races for pro-climate candidates in Montana, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. So we'll leave you with this. The generosity of this group in both this potential donation, but really also your time and engagement is so appreciated. And we're super happy to pause and go through some questions and further discussion.
Thank you so much, Erin and Abby. We really appreciate it. Great, thank you. So I'm going to go to the questions in the chat first, and then hopefully we can dive into some of the components of your work in 2024 and beyond. And Jill asked, are we calling it climate change still? What are you finding effective for all aspects of your messaging around this issue?
Yeah, I love that. That's a really good call to action. We've actually done a fair amount of research on this, and it's really interesting research to run because it changes, and it also depends a lot on your audience. So for example, if you're talking to a more conservative audience, there's actually a recommendation to not use the word climate at all, that you lose audiences when you talk about it in that way. And it also immediately becomes divisive and people turn off. So that one is actually a little bit unresolved for us. We feel it's important to like own this word and own the fact that like, this is a climate issue. Like, we're not gonna hide from that. Climate crisis is a really good push. Like, we definitely should be pushing this language to drive more urgency. There are also some other best practices that groups like the Rocky Mountain Institute and a few bigger think tanks have developed. One example of that is instead of using emissions, which is like a very technical jargony word, say climate pollution, or carbon pollution, which is more easily understood by the masses. And technical language is a way that, one, you can really break through, but two, it can also be a tactic that's used to take down an issue by getting lost in some of those nuances. So we can also share some of that research if that would be helpful. I would say it's something we're always working through and improving.
Would it be possible for POW Stoke the Vote to include how Project 2025's policy could detrimentally impact progress towards addressing climate change?
Yeah, I would say the more we can partner on this, the better. Like, I would want to spend a little bit more time understanding it, but I think we should definitely look at it, and like where we have coalitions, it's so much stronger. So like that work with the Environmental Voter Project, like they're exceptional at like running a ground game. So we get them to do that. Like they do door to door, they do phone bank. And so if we can include policies that are thoughtful and well developed that come from this, especially if there's local impact, that could definitely be a way, especially in our 501c4, to drive change. And we do a lot of like election guides. We do a lot of like materials and training that we could pull some of that into.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll definitely keep this conversation going because it's something that we are very, very focused on. And people who come to BigTent ask all the time, every event we have about Project 2025. So yeah, we'll keep this going. We'll have content for everyone, we promise. So you just had your CEO summit. You have a great match, which is exciting. What did you hear from them, and what are you expecting from your business partners in the next 4 months?
We love this. I'm gonna videotape you and bring this to them.
Oh, thanks.
So here's what's so interesting about corporate leadership. Like, I'm sure you all remember a time where companies did not engage in politics. It was completely separate, right? Like church and state. And maybe it was the advent of social media.
That's not separate anymore, Erin. So.
Good point.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
This reinforces the point I'm about to make. Things aren't separate anymore, right? So when you look at companies today, one of the ways that we were talking to CEOs, they were like, oh, like business is harder than ever. It's so hard to differentiate. Look at the companies who have created uncompetable differentiation. It is the companies who have stepped into the fray with a point of view. And I think Patagonia, one of our POW partners, is a great example of that. They came to the table with an authentic, like absolutely like 100, 200% commitment point of view on environmental stewardship. And my call to action to CEOs is, if you want to differentiate your brand and you want to connect to consumers who, by the way, have record low brand loyalty and will switch brands at the drop of a hat if they don't like what you're doing, you need to authentically have an answer for who you are and what you stand for. And then you need to show up for those issues and for those candidates. I still feel that political engagement is a frontier that tends to happen kind of behind closed doors, probably in interests that directly contribute to a company's bottom line when you think about some of the lobbying that happens. And it's not a criticism of that, but there is a brand and community building opportunity for companies to step into a more public role. And so we have companies that have joined us on DC lobbying trips. Burton is a great example. Burton has participated with us in supporting legislation that we've crafted. They've come to DC. They've used their voice for change, and their consumers know that. and it's impacting their company performance, and it's impacting their influence in how they build that and how they drive change in their home state. And one of the reasons I like that stat on the $1 billion every 3 weeks that the US is facing because of climate crisis related disasters, like that is now going to hit employees. So
Right.
the climate crisis is not a separate challenge anymore. Like employees of companies in communities are now facing this in their day-to-day and their productivity in the ways that they're living their lives.
Yeah, it's such a good point for all of us. So motivating you're motivating CEOs, business leaders by really giving them the tools where they could potentially lean in with authenticity. How does a Burton take their relationship with you and the fact that they've gone to DC and they're doing all these things, like how do they then go market it to their customers? Like what do you see, how do you see them doing it so well, and can you like package it and give it to other businesses, corporations to do the same thing? So I think it's so smart.
Yeah, I think it happens on two levels. With customers, companies like Burton do a lot of work to talk about their sustainability initiatives. So, beyond just an annual report, like they're talking about not only like, here are the ways that we made our business greener, which is one small step, we're actually influencing these systems. And so they're having that conversation with their customers in marketing channels, in their stores. We do a lot of events with Burton in their stores during like climate weeks in cities where you can kind of bring people in and have that conversation. And then the other level we see it happening at is with employees. So a lot of especially younger employees are demanding, like, what is your approach to sustainability, and have a point of view on joining a company that participates in ways that match their values. So we also have a lot of partners who request employee trainings. We bring in athletes, and that's sort of a huge inspirational moment. So I would say it's those two altitudes.
Great. Charlotte Tracy, our friend, our mutual friend, she says, do you think more companies are really beginning to understand the effect on their bottom line?
Yes. So especially the snow industry. The snow industry is the vanguard. So I used to work at Aspen Skiing Company. It's the second greatest job I've ever had after POW. There are many ski days out there. And Aspen had a statistic that in the last about 50 years, they've lost a month of their business. This is a business that only has 6 months of snow to begin with. So when you talk about economic vitality, it's estimated that the climate has cost the ski industry billions already. And going forward, it's not going to be pretty. East Coast resorts are really going to struggle with warmer temperatures. High altitude resorts, if you look at the way that they're developing, they're only developing in like really, really high altitude where the temperatures are colder. That will last for a little while, but not forever. So it's almost like we're like holding back, this thing that's coming. So outdoor recreation, a lot of people don't know this, it's $1 trillion industry. It is an incredibly powerful force. And so part of what we're trying to do is unite with other people in this industry to tell these stories. And we're going to elect candidates who support this powerful industry with a lot of sway in the US.
So let's get into the 2024 election before I let you guys go. So let's talk a little bit more about your strategy in terms of getting out the vote. I think the tripling is really important. Talk to us about how that works and what is the messaging that you're going to be using with the outdoor state ahead of the November election.
Yeah, so our message is really rooted in the excitement of voting. We don't want to position it as an obligation. We want to position it as, like, for lack of a better word, something all the cool kids are doing, and really put our athletes out front and center to first and foremost deliver that message. These are heroes to much of our audience. I have supporters of POW who say, I joined because I just love Conrad Anker, the rock climber, or I just love Jeremy Jones, the founder, and I really look up to them. And so we have a social first digital messaging strategy where we're putting out a lot of like go out and vote messages on social. We'll have athletes in natural environments and we'll couple those social messages, which have more scale. We'll apply spend to our target geographies where we know the elections are more important. And then we'll couple that with showing up at real life events. So whether that's the running races or film festivals, we're planning to host a series of film festivals throughout the fall with a film called Purple Mountains, where our founder actually goes into different communities. He talks to conservative communities, he talks to people of color in the outdoors, and he has hard conversations. And we're hopeful that that starts a dialogue that is even deeper than just this fall, but continues beyond that. And we find that that combination of films, events, a really heavy social focus will be on college campuses. The youth vote, as you all know, is incredibly important. And we show up in a really different way than other organizations, having this rooting and just love of the outdoors. And so we'll drive it that way and really go deep in those states that we mentioned.
Great. And Abby, I want to bring you back into the conversation. I didn't want to ignore you, but because that boulder picture is still, it's stuck in my mind. I'm going to have that with me. I've done a little bouldering and that was next level. So you do this work, you go talk to voters, you go to events. So talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, what it feels like. What do you hear from people? Would love to get your on the ground take.
Absolutely. No, I've been enjoying this conversation. And I don't feel left out, but thank you. And, but yeah, as Erin kind of described it, like for me as a climber, I kind of find what I do to be a little bit ridiculous. But then to walk into, on Capitol Hill and lobby and talk about our transmission bill and just to see like how, people light up in the rooms, whether that is, a senator or their aide, like these are common ground conversations that we can have. And so it really is this, I don't know, beautiful magical moment where we can like get kind of wonky about, say transmission, but we kind of got there by talking about our shared love of the outdoors. So, and for me as like the climb team captain, to have the opportunity to build an amazing alliance of individuals who are, again, want to just step out of being in performance, but really want to, use their energy for climate change policy, which is just kind of amazing. This is a volunteer situation,
Right.
and
They're
people
all volunteers. Yeah.
yeah, and I think what the a special unique sauces that we have is that we put our lives on the line whenever we go out and do our sport, and it's a scary place to be. But I think we can find like that, dip into that same level of courage and bravery to try to tackle climate change. So it's really empowering to have a whole alliance of I think there's over 250 athletes that are on our team right now, including scientists and creatives. So we just have a pretty powerful voice that continues to grow.
Yeah. It's funny, not funny, but one of the things I appreciated about POW when I got to learn about it from Charlotte was just that there is a positive message to it. And I think for all of us, we just struggle around the climate crisis. I mean, I have a 24 and a 20-year-old, and I try to balance reality with also hope and what we can do. And that's one of the things I really appreciate about POW. And I would recommend to everybody on the website to go see some of the videos. I mean, everybody on this call to go to the POW website and see some videos. Abby, I'd love to follow you. Will you, we can put it in the recap, your social channels. We'll make sure that we follow you and then we can see more POW content too. And so lastly, before we close, just some thoughts about some of these races that you are in that you want us to know about, and how climate policy is part of that conversation that you're having with voters in those states.
Yeah, so sorry, the question was how we're talking to voters in those those target states?
Yes, about climate policy specifically, because I would imagine that's what you're bringing. So how do you make it digestible for those voters in those states?
Yeah, it's sometimes I think climate needs a head of PR. Um, it's very technical and wonky. And one of the places we start is often, have you experienced changes? Do you feel the winters are different? And that's not partisan. That's someone's daily life in their community. And the answer is yes, whether it's because you're in Vermont and it was flooding, or you're in the Midwest and there were more tornadoes than usual, or you're like a coastal community and you're worried about your viability. And so in the states that we're in, wildfire is a really big issue. So we talk a lot about that. And there was actually a question in the chat about hunting and fishing. These are communities that trend conservative and are some of the best conservationists in the world. And so we welcome them with open arms. Like, we want as many hunters and fishermen to be a part of POW as possible. And it's where someone like John Tester does have a lot of resonance. You know, he's a Democratic senator in Montana, but he has these deep roots in stewardship of land and of community. And so we really try to focus on that, and focus not on like the chart I showed you of how the earth is warming. That's for this is a different crowd. When we're on the ground, we're talking to people about their lives and voting for climate as a priority, because the environment actually often isn't compared to some of the many other issues that this team is also tackling and are also important. So it's often a conversation to surface this issue, sometimes for the first time.
Yeah, that gives me my last question from Sue Mandel. She said, because it leads into that, where does climate fall in terms of concerns versus economy, women's reproductive freedom with young people that you meet? Where are you seeing climate, at the top, in the middle, or?
It's lower. I mean, if you talk to voters right now, they're worried about housing, they're worried about their communities, and reproductive rights is much higher right now than the environment. And think about it, right? Like, this is an issue where we're all the like slowly boiling frog in the pot, right? And there's this like, if you can't get a house, that is right in front of you. And that's something that you're facing every day. And it's why we think these organizations are so important. You know, if you look at environmentalism and philanthropy, it actually only receives like 2% of philanthropic dollars, versus schools, churches, hospitals, causes that pull in much, much bigger dollars, when actually philanthropy and policy are the two levers that are really going to help fix this. Like, it's really going to put boots on the ground, and it's going to drive policies that accelerate the energy transition. So that's part of our battle. We have to move a very, no pun intended, slow burning issue, but one that if we don't solve now is going to be way, way, way worse. We have to move that to the forefront. So wish us luck and speed in the uphill climb.
Yes, well, we're with you, and we are trying to elevate it as well. There's a link in the chat for everyone to please take a look. There is that great match from the CEOs. So I hope everyone will consider. Yes, Charlotte, urgency is real, and $3 billion every 3 weeks in damages in the United States is a big, big price tag, and we're all paying for it right now. So Erin and Abby, it was such a pleasure to meet you and talk to you. We're so grateful for your work, and we will definitely reach out about our messaging about Project 2025. Everyone who came today and took time out of your day, we really appreciate it. We just value all of you so much, and we got a lot of work to do in the next 4.5 months, but we're going to get it done. We're going to get it done. So